Welcome to Brew Cheese, where we brew up the finest of cheese. I'm Micah, and thanks for tuning in. If you're new to our channel, we brew up commander decks on a $25 budget, often with an unexpected twist. Today's deck tech features Isperia, Supreme Judge. She's 2 blue, and 2 white for a 6/4 Flying Sphinx. Whenever a creature attacks you or one of your planeswalkers, you may draw a card. We're putting her at the helm of a group hug deck, which aims to help all players at once. But let's take a moment to talk about group hug and what it is. Whereas most commander decks seek to deny resources to opponents, or at least outrace and outvalue opponents, a group hug deck provides resources to everyone. Why? Well, the reasoning is twofold. Politically, players may not want to mess with the player at the table, giving them all the extra draws and mana. Realistically, each of your opponents has 2 other players at the table that you've been building up, and so to any given one of your opponents, there are 2 other players that are way more threatening than you. But why Isperia for this strategy? Because every group hug deck has a little bit of pillow fort at its core. We're not always going to be ignored when someone's looking around the table and asking themselves who to attack. Isperia's ability provides a burst of card draw whenever we're attacked, and that's going to really come in handy for one of our key strategies. But let me expand on what Group Hug is not, or at least what it shouldn't be. Group Hug should never just provide resources without any end goal in sight. At the end of the day, you're still trying to win. Group Hug decks without a win con are just wasting everyone's time and trolling everyone just a little bit. Now that we've touched on that, what's our strategy? Well, everything I said before. Be valuable to everyone, make the game a little more fun. All of this warmth and fuzziness, it has a little bit of a more sinister reasoning to it. One of our possible strategies is to make everybody draw too many cards, but that's only one of a few possible ways we have to win. We're going to protect ourselves along the way by either countering or bouncing combo pieces that may result in someone else pulling out an instant win, by playing some protective effects to help deal with attackers, or by employing a little bit of a Turbofog strategy. One nice thing about all the card draw we're playing and our commander giving us a sudden burst of cards is that we have a really good chance to always have a fog effect in our hand. Let's move on to the card list, because I know I'm excited to share this deck with you all. Victory Chimes is an artifact that costs 3 and taps for a colorless, and it gets untapped during each other player's untap step. We can use this either completely unselfishly, adding a mana to someone else's mana pool when it's needed, or by always having an extra colorless available on each turn to cast one of our counter spells, removal pieces, or fog effects. Spectral Searchlight, 3 mana for an artifact, can be tapped to give any player whatever color mana they want. Not quite as flexible as the Chimes, since it doesn't untap repeatedly, and so it can only benefit one opponent or yourself on any given turn cycle. Blink Moth Urn is 5 mana for an artifact, and it's a deceiving one. Each player gets a colorless for each artifact they control in their pre-combat main phase. Of course, since we're running a large number of artifacts, we stand to benefit from this just a little bit more than our opponents, but hey, that's not our fault, is it? We do have to play a little bit of personal mana ramp if we want to be able to do anything at all. When we're drawing all these cards, it's inevitable that we're going to end up with a lot of lands in our hand. Walking Atlas can help with ramping us pretty reliably in this situation. It's too generic for a 1/1 construct creature. I always think it's an artifact creature with that border and color, but no, just a regular creature. We can tap it to put a land of ours onto the battlefield. We can use this to just play an extra land on our turns, or there are a few lands in the deck that it may be nice to sort of flash out when needed. Azorius Signet is 2 mana for an artifact, and we can pay 1 and tap it to get a white and a blue out of it. Azorius Locket is 3 for an artifact that taps for white or blue. We can pay 4 in any combination of those colors and tap and sack it to draw 2 cards. Star Compass costs 2 and it enters tapped, and it produces white or blue if we have a plains or island out respectively. Prismatic Lens costs 2 and taps for colorless, or we can pay 1 into it and tap it to produce 1 mana of any color, helping us to filter mana if we're drawing too much white or too much blue. We'll resume the group hug pieces with Gear Per Orrery, which for 4 mana allows each player to play an additional land on their turn, and if empty-handed, draw 3 extra cards. Pendant of Prosperity is a 3-mana artifact we donate to an opponent, and they have the option to pay 2 and tap it to draw a card and play an additional land. If they do, you get to do the same. Dictate of Crucifix is 2 blue and 1 for an enchantment with flash, and it has each player draw an additional card at the beginning of their draw step. Kami the Crescent Moon is 2 blue for a 1/3 spirit, and it also adds a draw to each player's draw step. Dacra Mystic is a single blue for a 1/1 Merfolk Wizard. We can pay a blue into it and tap it to have each player reveal the top card of their library, and then we choose for those cards to all go to the graveyard or to the player's hands. Temple Bell is a 3-mana artifact that lets us tap it to have each player draw a card. We can use this at any point, either right before our turn if we want to be selfish with it, or at the upkeep of the player after us if we want to avoid discarding and seem like we're benefiting the table. Otherworld Atlas is 4 for an artifact that can either tap to put a charge counter on it, or tap to have each player draw a card for each charge counter on it. I got to wondering when you should stop putting counters on it and when to start using it, as in what is the optimal number. Thankfully, Reddit user Darksteel5 did that math for us. If opponents still have 80 to 90 cards in their deck, the optimal number is anywhere between 6 and 10. We may want to stop at somewhere like 5 if we don't want to seem too suspicious. Mind's Aglow is a single blue, sort of, for a sorcery. Each player can pay whatever they want into X, and then everybody draws X cards. We're also running Prosperity, which for a blue and X, is a sorcery that draws each player X cards. Folio of Fancies is one of our most devious cards, looking much like a group hug piece, but is secretly one of our win cons. It's a blue and 1 for an artifact that gives no maximum hand size to all players. We can pay double X into it and tap it to have each player draw X cards, or we can pay 2 and a blue to have each opponent mill cards equal to the number of cards in their hand. Jace's Archivist is very similar, although players may realize it's a trap early on. It's 2 blue and 1 for a Vidalcan Wizard, and for a single blue and a tap, we can make everyone discard their hand and redraw cards equal to the greatest number discarded. One final piece of group hug is Gate to the Ether. For 6 mana, it's an artifact that has each player flip the top card of their library over during their upkeep, and if it's an artifact, creature, enchantment, or land, that player plays it for free. One problem with allowing people to draw so many cards is that winning via combo is a popular thing in Commander. Identifying and removing those pieces at instant speed will be necessary to keep the game going. Oblation is an ideal all-purpose way to make sure that combo pieces aren't easily reachable in the graveyard. For a white and 2, we shuffle any non-land permanent into its owner's library, and they draw 2 cards. Expel from Orazca is an instant for a blue and 1, and it bounces a non-land permanent back to its owner's hand. If we have the city's blessing, it goes to the top of the library instead. Blink of an Eye, besides having really weird artwork, is a blue and 1 instant that bounces any non-land permanent. If we kick it for the same cost, we get to draw a card as well. Into the Royal is completely identical, just with much more palatable artwork. Generous Gift is a white and 2 for an instant that destroys any permanent and gives the controller a 3/3 elephant in exchange. Generous Gift is capable of removing lands in case that's what needs removal. A quick history lesson. The King of Siam was known to gift rare albino elephants to people he secretly hated, so that the upkeep costs would ruin them financially. Fun! Disenchant for a white and 1 destroys an artifact or enchantment at instant speed. Oftentimes, at least 1/2 of a game-winning combo comes in one of these forms. Abolish is 2 white and 1, also for an instant, and it likewise destroys an artifact or enchantment. We can opt to discard a plains instead of paying for it. A removal classic, Swords to Plowshares, is a single white that exiles a creature at instant speed. Its owner gets life equal to its toughness. Of course, there's another way to disrupt combos with just good old counterspells, starting with Counterspell itself. It's 2 blue and counters a spell. Arcane Denial is a blue and 1 that counters any spell, and at the next upkeep gives the countered spell's caster 2 cards and you 1. Negate, also a blue and 1, counters any non-creature spell. These are the ones that are most likely to need countering, so the non-creature restriction rarely comes up. Dovin's Veto is a blue and white and also counters a non-creature spell. However, Dovin's Veto cannot be countered. Render Silent is double blue and a white, and not only counters a spell, but prevents that spell's caster from casting anything else this turn. Unwind is a blue and 2, but that doesn't really matter as we untap 3 lands so long as this resolves. It counters any non-creature spell. Rewind is 2 blue and 2, and untaps 4 lands if it resolves, and it counters any spell. Every once in a while, an opponent will swing a creature or 2 our way, and we'll need to be prepared. Fogbank is a blue and 1 for a 0/2 defending flying wall. We prevent all combat damage that it would take or deal. Guard Gomazoa is a blue and 2 for a 1/3 flying defending jellyfish. We prevent all combat damage that it would take. These 2 creatures, being both flying and impervious to damage, make them ideal reusable defenses able to block almost anything. Swans of Bren Argal is 2 and 2 of any combination of white or blue for a 4/3 flying bird spirit. Instead of taking combat damage, the attacker draws cards equal to the amount of damage that would have been done. When we're looking to low-key make everyone draw way too many cards, this is a fantastic defense. Gossamer Chains is 2 white for an enchantment, and we can return this to our hand to prevent all combat damage an unblocked creature would deal. Although this can obviously be used to protect ourselves, we can use this politically to save an opponent. After all, more allies means more punching bags that aren't you. Righteous Aura is one of the most underappreciated enchantments in Commander, capable of reducing any instance of damage down to just 2 life for an initial casting cost of a white and 1, and 1 white every time we want to prevent that damage. Because this prevents damage, we are able to be immune to commander damage while this is out and we have available white mana. Orzhov Advocist, for a white and 2, is a 1/4 human advisor. At the beginning of our upkeep, each of our opponents chooses to put 2 +1/+1 counters on one of their creatures, and if they do, they cannot attack us until our next turn. This card perfectly sums up the philosophy of Group Hug. If a given player declines to put counters on their creature, this both puts them behind the players that did power up their creature, and signals to us that they are considering attacking, so we know to leave mana open for one of our fog effects. We're also playing another protection piece in the form of Chrono Mantic Escape. It's 2 white and 4 for a sorcery, and it prevents players from attacking us until our next turn. We can also opt to cast this with Suspend 3 for just a white and 2. Whenever we do cast this, we then suspend it for another 3 turns to happen all over again and get suspended once more. Although only coming back every 3 turns to protect you, leaving 2 other turns you can be attacked, the escape can give you the time you need to pull off the win. With all of the card draw going on, combined with the extra card draw our commander brings, it only makes sense that we incorporate a little bit of a Turbofog strategy. That is, a strategy that always seeks to have a card in hand that nullifies combat to be used whenever needed. The first fog effect is Ethereal Haze, a single white for an instant that prevents all damage that creatures would deal this turn. Holy Day is also a single white and prevents all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. Like most of the pieces in the deck, we can use all of these fog effects politically to save another player if needed. Mandate of Peace is a white and 1, and it ends the combat step, which removes all creatures from combat and exiles all pending spells from the stack, making this act a little like a counterspell against combat tricks. This also prevents opponents from casting spells from here on out this turn, which is why the spell can only be cast in combat. Pollen Lullaby prevents all combat damage for a white and 1, and we clash with an opponent of our choice. That is, we both flip over the top card of our library, and if our card has a higher casting cost, we win, and that opponent's creatures don't untap on their next untap step. Dawn Charm, also a white and 1, has 3 possible modes to either fog combat, regenerate a creature, or counter a spell that targets us. The last 2 modes may undeniably come up, but the card is primarily here for the fog effect. Angel Song, also a white and 1, fogs combat and gives us the option to cycle it away for 2. Energy Arc is a white and a blue and untaps any number of target creatures, and those creatures have their damage prevented this combat. Prismatic Strands is a white and 2 and also fogs combat. We can also flash this back from our graveyard to use again later by untapping an untapped white creature we control. We have a number of win cons so that we're not just durdling around and making the game last longer. The first of these is a way to weaponize our card draw with Psychosis Crawler. It's 5 mana for an artifact creature with power toughness equal to our hand size, and every time we draw a card, the crawler deals 1 damage to each of our opponents. Another way we weaponize all the card draw is by taking advantage of the cards that people have been discarding. Keening Stone is a 6 mana artifact that lets us pay 5 and tap it to mill a player for the number of cards in their graveyard, making it a matter of only a few activations, or possibly only 1, to eliminate an opponent. We can also opt to turn this on ourselves if we want to make use of the next win con. Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, is triple blue and 1 for a 4 loyalty planeswalker, and if we would ever draw a card with an empty library, we win the game. We can +1 him to mill a player for 2 and draw a card. We can also -8 him to draw 7 cards, and then if we have no cards in our library, we win. If we don't want to try to win that way, or that avenue is closed to us, for a blue and 4 we have Psychic Spiral, an instant that shuffles all cards from our graveyard back into our library and mills an opponent for that many cards. Another way we can win is to use our opponent's prosperity against them. Corrupted Conscience is 2 blue and 3 for an aura that takes control of the enchanted creature and gives it infect. By picking the right target, we can win through poison counters. Dominating Licid is 2 blue and 1 for a 1/1 Licid. We can pay that same cost and tap it, and the Licid becomes a creature enchantment that we attach to a creature, and then we have control of it. If we need to grab a different creature, or need this to stop being an enchantment to dodge an enchantment removal, we can pay a single blue to end the effect. Reigns of Power is 2 blue and 2 for an instant, and we trade all of our creatures with those controlled by an opponent for 1 turn, and all of those creatures are untapped and get haste. This is a fantastic card for trading our much weaker creatures with a much more powerful force, controlled by an opponent, and then using that to crush either that same opponent or a different one. We can also use this if we need an emergency force of blockers, or to even fog a combat, by trading creatures during the attack, which removes all the attackers from combat. Azor's Elocutors is 3 and 2 of either white or blue for a 3/5 human advisor. At the beginning of our upkeep, we put a filibuster counter on the Elocutors. If there are 5 of those counters on it, we win the game. Whenever we take damage, however, we remove a counter. With all of the fog effects and defenses, it's very possible to be able to pull this off. Approach of the Second Sun is 6 and a white for a sorcery, and it gains a 7 life and gets put back into our library 7th from the top. If it's the second time we've cast it this game, however, we win. With the additional card draw generated by the deck, we can expect to be able to cast a spell well before another 7 turns from now. In the event that we need to keep from milling ourselves out, for example in the event that Jace is removed, we have a few emergency reset buttons. Elixir of Immortality is a 1-mana artifact that we can pay 2 and 2 to gain 5 life and shuffle our graveyard and elixir back into our library. Felden's Cane is also 1 mana for an artifact, and it can be tapped and exiled to shuffle our graveyard back into our library. I've made an effort to better explore mana bases in these deck techs and make them more useful. In that spirit, we'll start with Miko Koro, Center of the Sea. It's a legendary land that taps for colorless, or we can pay 2 and tap it to have each player draw a card. Gaia Reach Sanitarium, also a legendary land, taps for colorless, or we can pay 2 and tap it to have each player draw a card and then discard a card. Both of these lands play very well into our strategy, and as lands are much harder to remove. Emergence Zone taps for colorless, or we can pay 1 and tap and sack it to cast spells this turn as if they had flash. This can really help us in springing a win con on other players with minimal time to respond. For instance, we can flash out Azor's Elocutors right before our turn and get the first counter on it immediately, or cast Jace to be able to win almost immediately after on our draw step if our library is low. Detection Tower taps for colorless, or we can pay 1 into it and tap it to have our opponents and their creatures lose hexproof this turn. There may be instances where we need to remove something that's been given hexproof by equipment, or more rarely, target a player for the coup de grace. Prov, Spires of Order, is a legendary land that helps provide emergency protection. It taps for colorless, or we can pay 4, a white and a blue into it, and tap it to prevent all damage a single source would deal this turn. This effect is not at all cheap and is only limited to one source, but it is reusable and it is dependable. Mystifying Maze taps for colorless, or we can pay 4 into it and tap it to exile an attacking creature until the next end step. Temple of the False God taps for 2 colorless, but only if we control 5 or more lands. So long as we can get some of our draw online, we can easily get all 5 lands. Drownyard Temple taps for colorless, and if it is in our graveyard, for instance if we discarded it, we can pay 3 to put it onto the battlefield tapped. Effectively, this lets us play it as an additional land. Azorius Guildgate enters tapped and produces white or blue. Tranquil Cove is more or less the same, except it gives us 1 life when it enters. Azorius Chancery enters tapped, and we have to bounce a land back to our hand when it enters. It taps for a white and a blue. Lonely Sandbar enters tapped and produces blue. It can be cycled away for a single blue. Secluded Steppe is the same, but for white. All 3 of these lands subtly play into our strategy, letting us dump cards into our graveyard by discarding the bounced land with the Chancery or cycling the other 2. The remainder of our mana base is composed of 9 plains and 15 islands. The total cost for this deck came up to exactly $24.99. These prices are using TCG player prices, not a sponsor, and exclude shipping, but do include cards in any condition. Thank you for watching, and if you like what we're doing here, subscribe or share this video with a friend, or leave a comment telling us what we missed or what you'd like to see in the future. See you again next video.